Tuesday, November 13th, 1849. Two figures step into the dull morning light on the roof of Horsemonger Lane Gaol in Southwark, London. The first, Frederick Manning, struggles up the steps towards the gallows, his legs giving way. The second, his wife Maria Manning, dressed in a black satin gown with a veil covering her face, ascends the stairs calmly. More than 30,000 people watch as nooses are placed around the couple's necks. After a brief moment of tension, the executioner sends them both to their deaths, marking the first execution of a husband and wife in England in nearly 200 years. Charles Dickens watches from a room overlooking the executions, leading him to write a letter to the Times that same day stating, "I believe that a sight so inconceivably awful as the wickedness and levity of the immense crowd collected at that execution this morning could be imagined by no man." But what exactly had led to this married couple being jointly executed before such a large crowd that morning? 3 months earlier, Patrick O'Connor had arrived for dinner at the home of Maria and Frederick Manning in Bermondsey. As he stood to wash his hands before eating, Maria shot him in the head at point-blank range with a pistol. But Patrick did not die instantly, causing Frederick to brutally beat him in the head with an iron bar. Having been Maria's lover, the couple knew that Patrick was wealthy, and had hatched a plan to steal his fortune. Though things didn't exactly go as they'd planned, the police later discovered Patrick's body buried beneath the floorboards of their kitchen alongside Maria's blood-stained dress. The shocking discovery of the murder, the ensuing manhunt, and the couple's eventual execution captured headlines across Victorian Britain, and the case would soon come to be known as Born Marie de Roux in Switzerland in 1821, little is known about Maria's early life. People have speculated as to whether she had a troubled childhood or suffered from poverty leading to an obsession with wealth, but beyond assuming both are likely true. Given they were true for most people in that time period, there's little to no information out there about her. What we do know is that in 1846, she moved to England in the hope of finding better opportunities, and found work as a lady's maid, most notably for the affluent Lady Blantyre, the daughter of the Duchess of Sutherland. Perhaps due to the extravagant lifestyle she had glimpsed in her job, Maria became obsessed with wealth, and she dreaded the thought of returning to a life of poverty. Charismatic and attractive, with striking dark features and a curvaceous figure considered desirable at the time, Maria had no shortage of admirers to help her achieve this goal. In 1846, during a trip across the Channel to Boulogne with Lady Blantyre, Maria met Patrick O'Connor, a wealthy 50-year-old Irish customs officer from Tipperary. She was instantly captivated by Patrick, who had made a fortune through money lending in the booming railway industry, and convinced him to take her out to dinner once they were both back in London. A few months later, he visited Stafford House in Bloomsbury, where she was staying, and took her out to dinner. During that outing, Maria disclosed that she had started seeing another man, Frederick Manning. Frederick, a London native 2 years her senior, worked as a railway guard for Great Western Railway, a relatively low-paid position. However, he boasted that he was set to inherit a large sum from his mother. Both men proposed to Maria, leaving her to weigh her options and determine which man could provide the luxurious lifestyle she craved. Patrick was clearly already wealthy, but his older age and heavy drinking gave her pause. Frederick, on the other hand, was younger, more easily influenced, and, if his claim about an inheritance was true, would soon also be just as wealthy. So in May 1847, she chose to marry Frederick, tying the knot at St. James's Church in Piccadilly, and the couple soon moved into a fashionable home on Miniver Place in Bermondsey, southeast London. But it didn't take long for Maria to realize that Frederick's promised inheritance was a complete lie. Feeling she had married the wrong man, Maria rekindled her relationship with Patrick, and before long, they were having an affair. Oddly, Frederick seemed to know about the affair, and even allowed Patrick to join them for dinner. This peculiar arrangement lasted for a while, but by the summer of 1849, regretting her decision, Maria decided it was time for a change. If she couldn't have Patrick, she was going to make damn sure she could have his fortune. Together, the married couple devised a straightforward yet brutal plan to murder Patrick and steal his wealth. They intended to invite Patrick over for dinner, make him feel at ease, and then shoot him with a small revolver that Maria had purchased. Afterward, they planned to bury his body beneath their kitchen floor, covering it with quicklime to hasten decomposition. The following morning, Maria would head to Patrick's residence in Mile End to collect valuables, including his railway share certificates. Her presence there would raise no suspicions, as she was a frequent visitor. On July 23, 1849, Maria arranged for a bushel of lime to be delivered to their home, which she paid for. Then, on August 8th, a large shovel was also brought to the house. That very same day, she sent a note inviting Patrick over for dinner to carry out the disturbing plan. But their scheme fell apart when Patrick arrived late and accompanied by a friend, Pierce Walsh. Not one to be easily deterred, Maria asked Patrick to come back the next evening and hinted that if he came alone, there might be more than just dinner on the menu. Patrick readily agreed, completely unaware of what Maria truly had planned for him. The following evening, friends spotted Patrick crossing London Bridge, while the Mannings' neighbors noticed Frederick smoking a cigar by the back door. When Patrick arrived, Maria seemingly asked him to wash his hands in preparation for dinner and led him into the kitchen, which was located on a lower level. Exactly what happened next is a little murky, but from the evidence available, it seems that the Mannings may have already removed the flooring in their kitchen and dug up the soil beneath it. So it's plausible to imagine that Patrick realized something was amiss as he approached the sink to wash his hands. But whether he did or didn't, he would have had no time to escape, because before he had even reached the sink, Maria shot him in the back of the head. However, the bullet from the revolver didn't kill him, leaving him writhing in pain and attempting to speak as Frederick entered the kitchen. So, in Frederick's own words, he battered his head with a ripping chisel because he never liked him anyway, killing him. After the gruesome act had been committed, the couple hurriedly buried the body in soil and quicklime to speed up the decomposition, replaced the flagstones, and proceeded to sit down and enjoy their dinner as if nothing had occurred. The morning after the murder, Maria went to Patrick's lodgings and gained entry via his landlady, who was used to seeing her come and go. She rifled through his belongings and stole hundreds of pounds in cash, gold watches, chains, and railway shares, just as the couple had planned. The following day, under another pretense, she returned to Patrick's room to search for additional bonds she might have missed, but found nothing of value. Meanwhile, when Patrick had failed to show up for work, his fellow customs officers grew concerned, especially as he was known for his punctuality. So a mere 3 days after his murder, 2 of his colleagues came to the Mannings' home in Bermondsey, inquiring about their missing friend. Maria claimed she had dined with Patrick on the 8th, but had not seen him at all on the night he vanished. The colleagues were confused, noting Patrick had been seen on London Bridge on the 9th, and had told them he was going to the Manning household to dine with Maria. Remaining composed, Maria told them they must have been mistaken, and they eventually left. However, the presence of them showing up on their doorstep sent the married couple into a spiral of panic and paranoia. Maria told her husband that they needed to escape, instructing him to sell their furniture for whatever he could get. But while he was gone, she gathered up the stolen valuables into trunks and fled, jumping into a cab and abandoning him. Whether she had always planned to betray her husband or whether this was a response to her increasing fear and paranoia is unknown. When Frederick returned, he found the house had been ransacked and Maria had vanished. So he too grabbed what little valuables she had left alongside the proceeds from the sale of the furniture and headed to Waterloo to buy a ticket to Jersey. Meanwhile, Patrick's friends had reported him missing to the recently formed Metropolitan Police, which had been established just 20 years earlier. Detectives investigating the disappearance of Patrick were informed that a woman believed to be Maria Manning had been seen ransacking his home. This prompted them to head to the Mannings' address on Miniver Place. When they arrived and received no response to their knocks, they grew suspicious. Forcing their way in, they found the house to be abandoned and empty. In the house, an officer noticed wet mortar between 2 flagstones in the kitchen, leading them to pry up the stones and discover Patrick's soil-covered body beneath them. His wrists had been bound behind him and his legs had been tied. The quicklime sprinkled over his body hindered immediate identification, but dental records from his false teeth quickly confirmed that it was Patrick. The presence of a bullet in the skull, as well as multiple fractures, alongside Maria's bloodstained dress, also made it clear that the death was no accident. What had started as a missing persons case had now morphed into a murder investigation, and the hunt for the killers began. After putting out an alert for the capture of Maria and Frederick, the cab driver who picked her up came forward, revealing he had taken her to King's Cross Station. There, police quickly determined a nervous woman speaking English and French matching her description had boarded a train to Edinburgh. The Metropolitan Police telegraphed their counterparts in Scotland, but it turned out they had already arrested her for trying to sell Patrick's railway stocks to a brokerage. The brokers had already been notified that the stock numbers were stolen, causing them to contact the police. When police approached Maria, revealing she was going to be arrested for the murder of Patrick, she denied all knowledge of his death, calling him her dear friend. She did, however, claim that her husband was cruel and violent, and had threatened to kill her, prompting her to leave. Clearly, she was trying to make sure her husband was seen as the true killer. Regardless, Maria was brought back to London, where she was imprisoned and charged with murder. Frederick remained at large for an additional week. On his journey to Jersey, he had been spotted by an acquaintance, who later read a news report about the murder, which was now being called the Bermondsey Horror, prompting them to contact the police. This information was then telegraphed back to the Metropolitan Police, who arranged for Frederick's arrest and transfer to London. He was asleep in bed nursing a hangover when authorities burst into his room. Like his wife, Patrick immediately shifted the blame, claiming Maria was a violent woman who would kill a man as easily as a cat, and that he had frequently feared for his own life. He claimed Maria shot Patrick in the kitchen, and that he had no role in any of it, though he failed to provide an explanation for the multiple head wounds Patrick had received. With them both in custody, the investigators barely needed to question them, as both tried desperately to blame the other for the terrible crime. By August 23rd, both Maria and Frederick found themselves in the same prison, with their trial for the murder of Patrick O'Connor set to commence on October 25th. During the Victorian era, the law handled marriage in very different ways to how we do now in respect to crime. At this time, a wife was considered the property of her husband, so if she killed her husband, she was charged with petty treason, because the act was seen as a rebellion against society and the crown. By contrast, if a wife helped her husband cover up a murder, she wasn't held accountable at all, as she was expected to obey her husband's orders and follow his commands, so long as she didn't actively take part in the planning of the crime. So for Maria and her defense, the obvious question was she going to try and pin everything on her husband, and thus not be deemed accountable for her role in the murder? Commencing on October 25th, the trial against the murderous couple at the Old Bailey began, lasting for 2 days. While this might not sound like long, at that time, trials were generally brief, often wrapping up in just an hour or two. As you can imagine, given their instant betrayal of one another, both of their legal teams tried to shift the blame for the murder onto the other party. Maria's defense tried to claim she was acting under her husband's orders, hoping to avoid being found legally responsible. They attempted to portray Frederick as a jealous husband who was unable to accept his wife's infidelity. However, the court quickly dismissed this argument, given she had been the one to rob Patrick's apartment, and she had personally invited him to dinner the night he was killed. In contrast, Frederick's legal team portrayed Maria as greedy and obsessed with money, claiming she murdered her lover purely so she could steal his fortune. He had then used the iron bar to strike him because Maria had already shot him. Fighting to the end, Maria passionately insisted on her innocence, claiming that the only person she wished to kill was her husband, who had made her life unbearable. Ultimately, the fact that the shares were found in Maria's possession, and that she could not have buried Patrick's body alone, led the jury to conclude that both of them were guilty, after a brief deliberation of just 45 minutes. During the trial, Maria had maintained her composure, but upon hearing that they had both been sentenced to death, she erupted in a furious tirade against the judge and the jury, asserting that such injustice would never have occurred in Switzerland. The judge ignored her outburst, simply ordering for them to be taken away. The couple was then taken to Horsemonger Lane Gaol to await their execution. It has been claimed that Maria asked the warders escorting her if they had enjoyed her performance in the courtroom. From her cell, Maria didn't give up her quest for freedom. She wrote a letter to Queen Victoria, who she briefly met while in the service of Lady Blantyre. Supposedly, the Queen did read the letter and look into whether she could be pardoned, but ultimately concluded the evidence against her was too strong. When she failed to receive a pardon from the Queen, Maria resorted to trying to take her own life, using her long nails to try and puncture her windpipe, though she was stopped by 3 wardresses. Finally, she wrote to her husband Frederick, pleading for him to accept full responsibility for the murder of Patrick. Frederick, unsurprisingly, refused her request. On the morning of November 13th, Frederick and Maria were brought to a chapel together to receive last blessings before their execution. That day, Maria appeared composed and resigned to her fate, more focused on her appearance than the grim reality awaiting her. Frederick, in contrast, was visibly shaken, trembling as they endured the long walk from the chapel to the rooftop, where he ultimately collapsed upon reaching the gallows. Maria donned a black satin dress for the gallows, which sparked the enduring but untrue belief that black satin went out of fashion after her death. In reality, fashion catalogs continued to feature black satin long afterward, disproving the myth. There are also accounts suggesting that Maria and Frederick reconciled on the gallows, sharing a kiss before their execution as a gesture of forgiveness. Their execution drew an unprecedented crowd, with estimates suggesting that between 30,000 and 50,000 people came to witness the hanging. It attracted interest from all social classes, and every available vantage point was filled with spectators. To maintain order, between 500 and 1,000 police officers were deployed. At the time, public hangings served as a legally sanctioned means of sadistic and voyeuristic entertainment, allowing spectators to justify their attendance by framing it as a moral lesson since the victims were murderers. Crowds would gather, food stalls and tents were set up, and people treated the event like a festive occasion. A hush fell over the crowd as the executioner released the bolt. All eyes were locked on the two hooded figures silhouetted against the morning sky. As the trapdoor opened, their bodies plummeted, swaying and twisting slowly from the momentum of their fall. Frederick died instantly, whereas Maria struggled for several seconds before succumbing beside her husband. The crowd remained loud and disrespectful throughout the execution, disappointed by the fact that couple both died quickly, rather than suffering a prolonged struggle. The attitude and behavior of the crowd, more so than the actual execution, influenced Charles Dickens, who was present, to become a fervent advocate for the abolition of public executions. He found the scene so disturbing that it left a lasting impression, inspiring him to model the character Mademoiselle Hortense, Lady Dedlock's maid in Bleak House, after Maria Manning. His advocacy marked a significant step toward the eventual abolition of public executions and, later, the end of capital punishment in Great Britain altogether. Both Maria and Frederick were also mentioned in Wilkie Collins's 1860 novel, The Woman in White, which takes place a year after the murders. Ironically, the Mannings' bodies were buried with quicklime to accelerate their decomposition. By 1849, newspapers had become a powerful medium, and their case garnered headlines. In Victorian England, sexual scandal was seen as particularly shocking, and the case of Maria and Frederick Manning captivated Victorian society for weeks. It also helped that Maria was Swiss-born, allowing her to be framed as a foreigner, with some articles expressing relief that she wasn't an Englishwoman, implying that England's reputation remained untarnished by the crime. But beneath the spectacle, this case also mirrored a deeper shift in societal attitudes during the Industrial Revolution. As new forms of entertainment emerged, people began to question the need for the violent spectacle of public executions. Maria's story ultimately made its way into Madame Tussaud's Chamber of Horrors, who purchased the dress she wore during her hanging. Tussaud's would have likely dispatched an artist to the court to create a sketch of her face, ensuring an accurate likeness for the exhibit. More recently, an exhibition at the Museum of London Docklands in 2022 called Executions featured a death mask of Maria. And with that, our exploration of the Bermondsey Horror comes to a close. While it might not feel like a particularly crazy story compared to some modern true crime cases, the murder of a lover by a husband and wife duo who stole his belongings and buried him beneath the floorboards of their kitchen was a huge story at the time. It's hard to ultimately determine what really happened in this case. Most people are inclined to believe Frederick's final confession, that Maria had shot Patrick before he had bludgeoned him. Yet beyond that, almost every detail is drawn from their two contrasting accusations against one another. So it isn't inconceivable that some or all of the details have been warped or distorted, and that one of them may have been the main culprit. Yet given how readily they betrayed each other, would an innocent party have instantly fled, rather than report what their spouse had done? Anyway, as always, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and drop a comment down below to help it in the algorithm. This case was suggested to me by a subscriber, so if you have any cases you'd like to see me explore as well, feel free to let me know. You have been watching The Mystery Abyss.